All right. So, welcome. I'm Rob Preuss. I'm the chair of the Political Science Department at Metropolitan State University of Denver. This is a continuation of our Golda Meir Center's virtual speaker series. And I'm joined today by Ean Tafoya, who is a 2012 graduate, alum of Metropolitan State University, a political science major, a Native American Studies minor, President's Award winner, and currently doing all kinds of great things in the community. And we wanted to kind of touch base, chat, and see what he's up to, but also talk a bit about the intersection of uh, concerns about communities within communities of color, the environment, and how some of the new issues regarding coronavirus and the stimulus bills have affected communities of color. So, Ean, welcome. Thanks. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, I always love coming and speaking out to the graduates and who are watching, and hopefully the students who are watching.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, that's a lot of the audience out here today. So I want to give them a little bit of insight. So Ean, you have been generous enough to come into my classes over the years, and we've known each other for a long time. What are you up to right now? I know you're working with Green Latinos.
Yeah, just so anybody has a background on me, I've worked for three branches of local government, the mayor's office, city council, and the public defender's office. I've worked on public policy at all three levels of government, federal, state, and local. And I've ran as currently spokesperson on several initiatives that are initiated by the people to change laws and policy. So using all those different processes. I work as the Colorado Climate and Water Organizer for Green Latinos. I'm the first organizer in the state, in any of the states of the union. We're mostly based in Washington, D.C., working on federal policy. And my work has been here organizing grass tops, trying to bring together Latinos in a space, in the green space in particular, is predominantly dominated by white folks. And we've really struggled in that conversation to find space for environmental justice, to find space for racial justice and social justice. And so Green Latinos was founded more than 10 years ago around a conversation with Cap and Trade. And when they started to hire people to do outreach to Latinos, we realized we didn't have a network of environmentalist conservation advocates. My members make up people who are state senators and representatives, all the way down to artists and business owners, right? But what we do is we take them to Washington, D.C., and we try to influence policy. So things that have to do with climate, things that have to do with water, public lands, you name it, I'm in it.
All right. Well, and I know that you're working on a number of issues. What's currently on the agenda, maybe prior to the coronavirus shutdown, but what are the key spaces where you're finding there's room to deal with this nexus or bring this nexus of Latinos and environmental policy together?
Well, we've mostly been focusing, and I think it's intentional from the Trump's administration, is to keep us organizing each other rather than organizing the electorate. We're facing rollbacks left and right, you name it, rules and procedures and policy changes. That's mostly what my game has been as of lately. Some ones in particular, I think, to note, Waters of the USA rule, which has to do with what qualifies as a river that's going to be protected. And over 90% of Colorado would be affected by this rollback, because what it basically says is wetland areas and what they call ephemeral streams, streams that don't run all the time, would not receive the kind of protection from development. And so what we say is that toxics lying in waste in an ephemeral stream, and we get a good rainstorm 3 years later, it ends up in a larger body of water. It's also connected to another rollback that's called the 401 rule. The 401 rule is a part of the Clean Water Act, and what it does is allows states and tribal nations to review projects, federal projects for water quality. They have the ability to reject a project. So let's say a pipeline or a highway, et cetera. The Trump administration wants to make that time window shorter and effectively make it harder if you don't have the resources to fight. So imagine New Mexico or a tribal nation who doesn't have a large breadth of resources and people working in public administration. And then I would say in climate, the two biggest issues Well, three. There's one that's proactive. It's a 100% clean economy bill and clean energy bill. And it's about getting us to 100% renewable energy with setting real benchmarks along the way. It has 160 co-signers currently in the House of Representatives and Senators to move that bill forward. The National Environmental Policy Act, which has existed for 50 years, we actually had a hearing here. It's what reviews environmental projects for problems in the first place. Think I-70, that was a NEPA process, an oil pipeline, again, a NEPA process. And really,
I lost your mic. I lost your mic.
oh, there we go. What this really does is it limits the ability for communities to engage in the process, right? NEPA doesn't guarantee you that you'll stop a project or that you'll make the alterations that you want, but it creates a process where you can actually engage and they have to respond to you. And then I would say we just got an announcement on Cesar Chavez Day, the Clean Cars rollback, which affects Colorado, 14 other states. Well, Colorado is one of the 14 states, and Washington, D.C., which have said, if you're going to sell cars in our community, then you're going to have to advance them to cleaner technologies. And that's really about air quality. It's really disheartening for Trump to make these announcements and continue rollbacks while we're in the midst of a pandemic. I'm sure maybe people have seen, there was a statement said that the Environmental Protection Agency would be laxing their enforcement of protections during this process. And all that does is put people more at risk. It's really unacceptable, especially when we're talking about air polluters.
So, I mean, I think you make a couple of really good points. One of those is that, advocacy organizations' roles, have roles in these really larger policy issues, but at the same time, those administrative rules are things that are really uniquely both important from an environmental policy perspective, but also something really hard for citizens to navigate. So thus the role for an advocacy organization really kind of taking the lead.
Beyond even navigating, Rob, like if you have a rulemaking that normally, like let's say under Obama's administration, took place in 14 different cities, and now all of a sudden you give people 2 weeks and it's only in 2 cities, then even getting there is a hurdle, let alone understanding the legal process or what you can actually affect or having the background to voice your opinion.
Right. So I mean, in a lot of ways, really just kind of coordinating those efforts and dealing with overcoming some of these changes, or at least trying to head off some of these changes. Yeah, it makes sense. So, well, what are some of the unique elements in this intersection between, say, Latino communities and the environment that you folks have been working on? What are major concerns that have maybe even more of a negative effect on Latino communities than other communities? What is that niche?
Yeah, well, majority of Latinos live in a county that has violated air quality standards under the Clean Air Act. So on that basis alone, you can say that people are facing disproportionate amounts of cardiovascular issues, asthma, those related issues. Same goes for water quality. Many of these people are living in places where lead issues are rising to the top, I think. There's even emerging technologies. Well, they're old technologies, but they're emerging chemicals that we're worried about, like PFAS, which are more than 5,000 chemicals that accumulate in your body and lead to all sorts of toxicity. Huge issues with that in wells and people who live directly along bases, an Air Force base, Army base, an airport. Same thing with a refinery or any place that has a high volume of high intensity fires as a possibility. They use this as a fire suppressant. And so when they use that as a fire suppressant, it leaks into the water, it gets into your bodies. All across this country, including here in Colorado, Latinos live on the front lines, on the fence lines. We call them frontline communities for that reason.
Okay. Yeah, and there's been a slew of public opinion survey data out there focusing on Latinos, really showing that Latinos are very concerned, right, about environment, and they're willing to vote based on their concerns about the environment. Do you get that sense when you engage in outreach?
Oh yeah, I think people shouldn't believe the hype. We overwhelmingly, and we're talking in the 80% when they do these kind of surveys, people, if they ask if you're an environmentalist, yeah, Latinos see themselves as environmentalists. I think the idea that, especially if you're going to talk about Chicano movement or people who are more connected to their indigenous roots as well, I think there's this underlying, hi grandma, there's this underlying understanding that, you know, why would we want to mess up the system and the earth that's here for us? It just doesn't make a lot of sense. I will say one place that we've really been trying to bridge is the African-American, the Black community. When they get surveyed, they aren't majority considering themselves environmentalists. And so I think we have more work to do. I do think that is focused based on your community. So if you're talking about people in Delaware or in Louisiana or some of these places where they're frontline communities, absolutely the African-American communities in the fight. Here in Colorado, I think we're starting to see fracking become that nexus for Latinos and African Americans, Green Valley Ranch, for Northeast Aurora, as a place for that entry to understand.
Right, certainly, and that's where, you know, a lot of growth in terms of county and population, Latino growth in those areas certainly kind of coincide with
gentrification. I don't know if we want to call it growth, but it's definitely
sure, yeah, that's fair enough. A whole different segment, maybe. So, how do you? You talked about reaching out to the African American community, and I think that's interesting, right? In terms of that coalitional aspect. What's the messaging? Is it essentially the same that, you know, environment matters to you and pointing those out, or is it a longer term coalitional argument, or, you know, how do you approach?
Well, I think that you just need to look at the statistics. You know, when we're looking at health statistics, we know that African Americans and Latinos just have higher morbidity rates. We have higher instances of disease. And a lot of that is contributed not just to environmental justice, but it has to do with social justice, right? Access to a whole host of things that the average person's not, average white person's not, or middle class. I shouldn't even say that there are poor white people too who are on the front lines here, but we just know that because of historic redlining and zoning, it's not typically there.
Yeah, those definitely work out. So we mentioned the health issues, and of course, you know, we're doing this virtually because of our stay-at-home order and because of the coronavirus. Are there particular issues or concerns among Latino communities and the coronavirus or the stimulus packages that you guys are interested in and concerned about?
Yeah, we've definitely been tracking along with the stimulus bills. We were told there was going to be a lot of environmental components in a fourth stimulus bill. I was just on a call. It sounds like that's going to be pushed to a fifth. Typical conversation. I think if you look at the governor's economic relief council that he set up, we have demanded a lot of transparency into this process. But undocumented workers, who are people who pay taxes in our community, whether people agree with them being here or not, are just as susceptible to this, or just as susceptible to homelessness, or just as susceptible to hospitalization as anybody else. And so really, I think that there's a nexus there. And then, as I was telling you on this call, I mean, breaking news, you know, the community has organized many groups and elected officials to ask for the pause of I-70 construction between I-25 and Colorado. I've talked to you many times about how I was intimately involved in the settlement and trying to stop the project. This isn't about stopping the project. This is about pausing it because recent studies are coming out that the morbidity rate of people when they're exposed to the small particulate matter is much greater. When you talk about coalition and struggles in this, you know, when you struggle with coalitions, especially groups that are more established, they have processes to sign on to these letters. And, oh, well, I actually just received one email before this, like, well, we're not so sure about the science. And I'm like, it's happening now. People are dying now. Waiting isn't a choice. And
right.
This is probably why Green Latinos exist in this space, why there are identity-based politics groups in this space, because these white-led organizations tiptoe around environmental racism. And we're going to be on the front lines with our people.
Right. And certainly there's been some more reports just also with coronavirus, just higher morbidity rates among African Americans. I'm not so sure if I've seen the Latino data, but certainly an issue that once again disproportionately affects, right, people of color, and something we ought to be concerned about. You know, you mentioned the particulate matter and the I-70 project. Now, for real brief 2-minute review for folks that may not be completely familiar with it or see the construction but not really sure what's going on of the
Yeah,
history.
I can give you a 101 and talk to you about what particulate matter means and what the size of it means. And so this project, for a choice made by the CDOT under Hickenlooper's administration, was to dig a hole. And they're digging a hole next to a river. And so you get all this hydrological pressure as a result. The surrounding soil is of the highest classification of toxicity under the federal government. That's called Superfund. There's several Superfund sites here. So while you're digging this hole, you're changing the hydrological pressure, which is pulling out these dangerous toxic chemicals. There's more than a list of 9 of them. I can't list them all here. And then on top of that, you're digging this hole, which kicks up all this dust. And there's different sizes of particulate matter. They call it PM10 and PM2.5. PM10 is like the average dust that you're breathing. PM2.5 is so small that it actually crosses the blood barrier in your lungs and it enters your body and it builds up in your body and causes a whole sorts of neurological issues, all sorts of problems in general. And so in its connection with COVID, your lungs are already compromised. This is a lung compromising illness. And so that's really why that matters to people. PM 2.5 is also the size of a lot of the exhaust that comes out of commercial vehicles, construction vehicles. And so when we got sued on I-70, we believed that our analysis said that into the future, daily truck traffic, car traffic was going to violate the clean air standards of what they are now. And in all honesty, a lot of these standards are set high because of corporate carve-outs and because of lobbying dollars that have happened over the years. And so what we got out of that I-70 project was that there are comprehensive interconnected health problems there that are coming from multiple sources of pollution, and we need to figure that out. And so that's where our $600,000 settlement is going to. But what I do know is, if you're living at 90% toxicity for this chemical and this chemical and this chemical, technically they're all legal. Right. Technically they're all within a legal standard. But the cocktail of chemicals is clearly having an impact there because holding for race and class and all these other things, there are higher instances of disease there.
Sure. Yeah, and that was the big argument that led to the settlement, right? Am I correct in that?
Well, we really reached a settlement, I believe, because the government gets a lot of deference in the political sphere, also in the judicial sphere. So our actual analysis that we had paid to do ourselves, we were struggling to get put into the record after the record had already begun. And the government forced the community to raise more than $150,000 of its own money to put into it. And I had to fly to DC several times and pretty much beg Earth Justice to come to our aid. And Earth Justice stepped in, picked up the tab with us, and in total, we paid for a study that was $1,000 from the Colorado Latino Forum, but it only cost us $300 in legal costs outside of the study. And so thank God for Earth Justice. I think these legal aid funds, when you need a lawyer, you need a lawyer. When a community needs a lawyer, that's Earth Justice.
Right, definitely. Well, let me switch gears just a little bit. And so as an activist, an organizer, and working in the advocacy community, what's changed in terms of how you go about operating in a virtual world? Is it how different is it? I mean, how do you
well, I'm all caught up on my email. I'm all caught up on my email. My boss is happy about that. It's a little bit harder to get out of meetings. Like normally I'd say, oh, I'm going in between these two places, but now they know I'm at home. I'm on Zoom a lot, which I think in some ways is beneficial when it's you and I talking or 4 or 5 people talking. But when you get into that much larger room setting, right, you're not able to see the body language of people, to see through their bullshit or whatever, whomever you're talking to. We know that 90% of language is body language. And so when you're missing that component, that's critical. And then I think students probably recognize this, that the bandwidth is just like freaking overloaded and you get kicked out of these meetings. It's your turn to say something. You're not sure if you're going to be able to. Maybe you have to call in from this number. I try to take a breath and remember that I was alive during dial-up.
Yeah. That's true. Well, and when you talk about bandwidth, actually, that's another issue that overlaps with poorer communities and communities of color too. Just having that availability, having the bandwidth, having the connectivity that other communities have. Yet another kind of disparity that is brought to light in this current situation, I think.
And they're listed essential workers. I think that's a really important thing to say. I've been in the news having conversation about who really is essential workers and who's not. There's a class divide there. And I know from taking your classes that often class divide lines up with race more
Yep.
often than not. I think we would like to get to a world where we didn't need identity politics and we could decenter any race. But right now we're centering on certain races because when we lift those most vulnerable in our community, we all gain. By fighting for the air quality for the people in North Denver, the air quality for all of us improves.
Right. No, definitely. And so, one last thing just to kind of wrap up, and I usually ask this when you visit our class too, but kind of points of advice for students who are interested in the topic. I mean, what do they need to do to both kind of get their feet in the water, but also to kind of get on that path of having a real impact?
Well, I think there are hundreds of groups that fall into any sort of policy line that you're interested in. I'm not really in favor of unpaid internships. I think they should be illegal. I think that that is exploitive to people in general.
Right.
But if you're willing to volunteer your time as a volunteer or something, that's clearly an easier access. I think campaigning is access. But let's be honest, you can build relationships with any elected official, any person that has their email out on the list. It really is behooved on you to just pick up the phone, to send in an email, say, no, I checked out your LinkedIn. I like what you're about. Do you have any advice for me? Can you make 10 minutes for me? And it's okay to be rejected. I lost an election. If some people say no, they say no.
Yep.
Don't give up. And, it takes time. I was really fortunate, and I think given my track record of graduating in the top of the class, that I was recruited to work for the mayor's office. But that's not everyone's path, and I recognize that. But there are a lot of really amazing government jobs, and once you get in, you're in. And there's a lot of internal hiring. So even if you're saying this might not be the best fit for my first job, that's okay.
Yeah, you'll get there. Yeah, it's a long path. You just have to start with that first step. I think that's important.
And the long arc bends towards justice. If you're me or Bernie Sanders or any of these people who say that, if that's where your path is. If you're conservative and you think your justice is fiscal responsibility, there's a place for you too.
Right. Definitely. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. I'm going to end with our screen one last time. Thank you so much, Ian, for having this conversation, and hopefully we will be able to see you soon.
Absolutely. I'm always proud to come back to Metro State.
All right.